Welcome to Life Stories, where we share extraordinary tales of courage, resilience, and hope. Today's story begins with a young boy, Adam Carter, who finds himself in the middle of a murder trial, holding the key to uncovering the truth. Armed with nothing but his determination and a piece of evidence, Adam risks everything to challenge the system and fight for justice. His journey is one of bravery, love, and the power of standing up for what's right. Subscribe to our channel to dive into today's inspiring story and discover how one small voice can make a big difference. The courtroom buzzed with an electric intensity that seemed to seep into the very air. Yet for me, it all felt surreal. Like a distant echo. The defendant, Nick Harris, sat motionless at the defense table. His hollow cheeks and weary eyes seemed to carry the weight of the world. A stark contrast to the bustling legal drama unfolding around him. To most, he looked like a man who had resigned himself to his fate. But there was something about his stillness that struck me as profoundly human, vulnerable. Almost noble in a quiet, tragic way. The prosecutor was mid-sentence, his voice ringing with confidence as he pieced together the case against Nick, weaving a damning narrative of guilt. The defense attorney, on the other hand, was frantically flipping through her notes, her face tight with the strain of defending a man the world seemed determined to convict. It was then, as the gavel hovered in the air, that a voice rang out, a voice so unexpected, so pure, that it sliced through the tension like a blade. "Stop the trial. I have something to say." Every head turned, the courtroom frozen in a tableau of disbelief. Standing in the aisle was a boy, no older than 10, with messy blonde hair that fell into his wide, determined blue eyes. His sneakers squeaked faintly as he shifted his weight, fists clenched at his sides. It was as though the very weight of his small frame held an unspoken defiance against the room's towering authority. For a moment, no one moved. Judge Meredith Thompson, a stern woman with a reputation for her no-nonsense demeanor, lowered her gavel but did not strike it. Her silver-rimmed glasses glinted under the fluorescent lights as her sharp gaze fixed on the boy. "Who are you? And what are you doing in my courtroom?" she demanded, her tone both curious and commanding. Before the bailiff could approach, the boy raised his voice again, this time trembling but resolute. "You can't throw me out. I know something that will change everything." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Gasps and whispers rippled through the rows of spectators. Some craned their necks to get a better look at the boy, while others muttered questions no one had answers to. The defense attorney froze, papers clutched in her hand, her expression shifting from disbelief to cautious hope. Even the prosecutor, caught mid-argument, stood silent, his mouth slightly open as if the boy's interruption had broken his rhythm. Judge Thompson slammed her gavel repeatedly, her voice cutting through the noise. "Order. I will have order in this courtroom." But her eyes never left the boy, suspicion and curiosity flickering in equal measure. When the room finally settled, she leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. "Young man, you have just disrupted a murder trial, a serious offense. What could you possibly know that justifies this?" The boy swallowed hard. "Because," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "I know who really did it. And it wasn't him." He pointed a trembling finger at Nick Harris. A silence unlike any other filled the room. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade as all attention turned to the boy. Nick's hollow gaze sharpened, his expression one of startled recognition, as though he was staring at a ghost. The judge's brow furrowed deeply, and her voice softened, though it remained firm. "Who are you?" she asked. "And what do you mean by that?" Before the boy could answer, the heavy courtroom doors burst open. A man in a dark suit, his face pale and frantic, rushed in. "Adam," he called, his voice full of desperation. "What are you doing here?" The boy flinched at the sound of his name but did not turn around. Instead, he kept his eyes locked on the judge. "Please," he whispered, his voice now barely audible but no less determined. You have to listen to me. Judge Thompson hesitated, then waved the bailiff over. Take him to my chambers, she instructed. Her voice quieter now. We'll sort this out in private. Everyone else stays seated. This trial isn't over. The boy, Adam Carter, glanced back over his shoulder as the bailiff led him toward the doors. His blue eyes shone with a mixture of fear and fierce resolve. It wasn't just the plea of a desperate child, it was the look of someone who had already decided that doing the right thing was worth whatever came next. As the heavy doors closed behind him with a dull thud, the courtroom buzzed with unanswered questions. I was there that day, sitting quietly in the gallery, like a fly on the wall to the unfolding drama. It wasn't just the boldness of Adam's interruption that struck me, it was the courage it took for someone so young to stand up in a room full of adults. To speak his truth no matter how improbable or inconvenient it seemed. And as I watched Nick Harris shift uneasily in his chair, his gaze lingering on the closed doors, I realized something extraordinary was happening. The wheels of justice, so often slow and rigid, had just been jolted by the smallest voice in the room. And I knew, instinctively, that whatever Adam had to say would change everything. The quiet in Judge Thompson's chambers was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Adam sat in a large leather chair that dwarfed his small frame, his legs dangling over the edge. His hands fidgeted nervously in his lap, and his wide blue eyes darted around the room as though searching for something solid to anchor him. Across from him sat the judge herself, her imposing presence softened slightly by the absence of her courtroom bench. Still, her gaze was as sharp as ever, and Adam could feel the weight of her scrutiny. Adam Carter, Judge Thompson began, her voice measured but firm. Do you understand the seriousness of what you've done today? Adam nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in his throat. Yes, he said, his voice quiet. But I had to. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. The judge studied him for a moment, her hands folded neatly on her desk. All right. Then she said, leaning forward slightly, why don't you tell me what it is you think you know? Start at the beginning. Adam hesitated, his small hands clenching into fists. The enormity of what he was about to say weighed heavily on him. He took a deep breath and began, his voice trembling at first but growing steadier with each word. It was last summer, he said, his gaze fixed on the polished surface of the desk. I was riding my bike in Grant Park. It was a sunny afternoon, and I was taking the path near the lake. That's when I saw them, a man and a woman arguing. Judge Thompson's brow furrowed slightly. A man and a woman? Do you mean Nick Harris and the victim, Emma Davis? Adam shook his head firmly. No. It wasn't her. Emma had dark hair. This woman was blonde. The judge's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of curiosity breaking through her stern demeanor. Go on. They were standing near a car. Adam continued, his voice growing stronger as he recounted the memory. A dark blue sedan with a dent in the back bumper. The man was yelling, pointing at her, and she kept shaking her head. Then he grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the car. She tried to pull away, but he shoved her inside and drove off. Judge Thompson leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. And you're certain the man you saw was Nick Harris? Adam shook his head again, his messy blonde hair falling into his eyes. No. It wasn't him. I'm sure of it. The man I saw that day, it was Kyle Benson. The judge's gaze sharpened at the mention of the name. Kyle Benson? Emma Davis's ex-boyfriend? Yes. Adam said, his voice unwavering. I didn't know who he was back then. But when I saw his picture on the news later, I recognized him. And the car too, it was the same one. Judge Thompson sat silently for a moment, her piercing eyes locked on Adam's face as though trying to gauge the truth of his words. Finally, she spoke. Did you tell anyone about what you saw? I told my mom, Adam admitted, his voice dropping slightly. But she didn't believe me. She said it was probably just a couple having a fight and told me not to worry about it. The judge sighed. Her expression unreadable. Adam, you've put me in a difficult position. What you're saying is serious, very serious. But you're just a child. And this is a murder trial. Do you understand what's at stake here? Adam nodded solemnly. I do. That's why I couldn't stay quiet. Nick Harris didn't do it. I know what I saw. The room fell silent again. The weight of Adam's words hanging in the air. Judge Thompson finally leaned forward. Her sharp gaze softening just slightly. All right, she said. I'll bring this to the attention of the attorneys and the court. But, Adam, you need to understand something. Your testimony alone isn't enough to change the outcome of this trial. We'll need more than just your word. Adam nodded, though his chest tightened at the realization that what he had done might not be enough. Yes, he said quietly. The judge motioned to the bailiff standing near the door. Take him back to his mother, she instructed. And make sure he's safe. As Adam left the chambers, a mix of fear and determination flickered in his eyes. He had done his part. But he knew deep down that this was far from over. The truth was out there. But finding it would require more than courage, it would require a resolve he wasn't sure he had. Yet, as he glanced back at the judge's chambers, one thought burned in his mind: he couldn't let an innocent man go to prison for something he didn't do. The courthouse hallways felt colder and emptier as Adam walked alongside the bailiff. His sneakers squeaking faintly against the polished floor. His heart pounded. And his palms were slick with sweat. But there was also a flicker of hope inside him. He had spoken the truth, it was out there now. No longer locked away in his chest. But as they approached the waiting area where his mother sat anxiously, a wave of doubt began to creep in. Would they even believe him? Could they? Jessica Carter, Adam's mom, jumped to her feet the moment she saw him. Her expression was a mix of relief and frustration. Adam, she exclaimed, rushing over and wrapping him in a hug. What were you thinking? Running into the middle of a courtroom like that? Adam looked up at her, his blue eyes earnest. I had to. Mom. I had to tell them what I saw. Jessica knelt in front of him, gripping his shoulders tightly. Adam. This is serious. That's a murder trial. You can't just barge in like that and expect people to listen to you. But they did listen. Adam said, his voice resolute. The judge is going to tell the lawyers. I told her everything, the car, the argument, the blonde woman. She said it's important. Jessica sighed heavily, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I know you think you're doing the right thing, but, honey, these things are complicated. People aren't going to just take your word for it. Adam looked down, his fists clenching. But I know what I saw. Mom, if no one listens, then how will they ever know the truth? Jessica's face softened, and she pulled him into another hug. You've got a good heart, Adam. I just don't want you to get hurt. As they stood there, a familiar voice cut through the quiet. Mrs. Carter. Jessica turned to see Judge Thompson's bailiff approaching them. The judge has instructed that you and Adam stay at the courthouse for now. There may be follow-up questions. We've arranged for a private room where you can wait. Jessica frowned but nodded, guiding Adam as they followed the bailiff. Once inside the room, a small, plain space with a table and chairs, Jessica sat down heavily. Adam fidgeted, the nervous energy from earlier refusing to leave his small frame. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Jessica finally spoke, her voice low and steady. Adam, I know you're trying to do the right thing, but you're just a kid. This isn't your fight. Adam looked up sharply. But it is. Mom, Nick Harris didn't do it. If I don't say something, no one else will. Jessica's lips pressed into a thin line, and she seemed to search for the right words. Before she could speak, there was a knock at the door. A woman entered, her presence calm but commanding. She introduced herself as Sarah Walker, the defense attorney for Nick Harris. I've just come from Judge Thompson's chambers, Sarah said, sitting across from them. Adam, I've heard about what you told the judge. Can I ask you a few questions? Adam nodded eagerly. I'll tell you everything. Sarah leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. You said you saw Kyle Benson with a blonde woman that day in the park. Can you describe her? Adam furrowed his brow, trying to recall every detail. She was tall, with long blonde hair. She was wearing a blue jacket. She looked scared, like she wanted to leave. But Kyle wouldn't let her. Sarah nodded, jotting notes in a small notebook. And you're certain it was Kyle Benson? Yes. Adam said firmly. I saw his picture on the news later. And I knew it was him. Jessica interjected, her tone cautious. Ms. Walker, what does this mean for Nick? Sarah hesitated, then said, it means we have a lead, a potential alternate suspect. If what Adam is saying can be verified, it changes everything. But we'll need more evidence. Adam's stomach sank at those words. What more do you need? He asked, his voice tinged with frustration. I told you everything I saw. Sarah offered him a kind smile. What you've done is incredibly brave, Adam. But in court, we need proof. Don't worry, though. We're going to investigate this fully. As Sarah left the room, Adam slumped back in his chair. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, heavier than before. Jessica reached over and squeezed his hand. See, she said softly. You've done your part. Now let them handle it. But as Adam sat there, staring at the plain walls of the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that his part wasn't over. There were too many unanswered questions, too many pieces of the puzzle still missing. And deep down, he knew he couldn't just leave it at this. The ride home was quiet, the hum of the car engine filling the silence between Adam and Jessica. She glanced at him through the rearview mirror, her brow furrowed with concern. Adam stared out the window, his mind replaying the events of the day. The courtroom, the judge, the defense attorney, they all felt like pieces in a puzzle he still couldn't solve. Jessica finally broke the silence. Adam, she began, her voice soft but firm. I want you to promise me something. Adam looked at her reflection, waiting. I want you to let the adults handle this from now on. You've done your part. It's not safe for you to keep getting involved. Adam frowned, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. But what if they don't figure it out? What if they don't believe me? Jessica sighed. It's not your job to solve this. Adam, you're a kid. Your job is to stay safe and let the people trained for this do their work. Adam didn't respond. He turned back to the window, watching the city blur past, his chest tight with frustration. He knew his mom meant well, but he also knew he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the truth was so close. When they arrived home, Jessica busied herself in the kitchen, preparing dinner. Adam retreated to his room, shutting the door behind him. He sat at his desk, staring at the blank page of his notebook. He began jotting down everything he could remember about that day in the park, the car, the argument, the woman's fearful expression, the way Kyle had looked around nervously before shoving her into the car. His hand paused over the page. There was something about Kyle's demeanor that day that stuck with him. He didn't look angry, like someone who was about to commit a violent crime. He looked scared, desperate. What was he afraid of? And why hadn't anyone mentioned this woman before? Adam's thoughts were interrupted by the faint sound of his mom's voice calling him for dinner. He sighed, closing the notebook and tucking it into his desk drawer before heading to the kitchen. Jessica had set the table, and the smell of spaghetti filled the room. She tried to lighten the mood, asking him about school and his friends, but Adam could tell her heart wasn't in it. She was worried. He could see it in the way her hands fidgeted with her fork and the way her gaze kept drifting toward the window. Mom, Adam said suddenly, setting down his fork. Do you think they'll find out the truth? Jessica looked at him, startled by the question. I don't know, she admitted. But I believe they'll do their best. Adam nodded slowly, but his expression remained troubled. He wanted to believe her, but the nagging feeling in his chest wouldn't go away. That night, Adam lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet. The only sound the faint creak of the floorboards as the house settled. He thought about Nick Harris sitting in that courtroom. His hollow eyes and defeated posture. Adam couldn't shake the image of the man who seemed to have given up hope. His mind wandered to the woman in the park. Who was she? Where had she gone? Was she still alive? And if she was, why hadn't she come forward? Unable to sleep, Adam got out of bed and grabbed his tablet. He searched for news articles about Emma Davis's case. Scrolling through photos and headlines, most of it was information he already knew, details about her disappearance. The evidence against Nick Harris. The timeline of events. But then, something caught his eye. It was an article featuring a photo of Emma and her best friend, Rachel Daniels. Rachel was blonde, with a kind smile and bright eyes. Adam's heart raced as he studied the photo. Could she be the woman he saw in the park that day? He searched for Rachel's name, scrolling through articles and social media profiles. Her accounts had been inactive for months. The last post a cryptic message, "I won't stop until we get justice." Adam's stomach churned. Was Rachel the missing piece in all of this? And if so, what had happened to her? The sound of footsteps startled him, and he quickly closed his tablet. Jessica peeked into his room, her expression soft but tired. "Adam, it's late," she said. "You need to get some sleep." Adam nodded, slipping under the covers as Jessica closed the door. But sleep didn't come easily. His mind was racing with questions. And for the first time, a hint of fear crept in. If Rachel knew something, and she had disappeared, what did that mean for him? For Nick? And for the truth he was so desperately trying to uncover? The next morning dawned grey and overcast. The kind of day that seemed to match the heavy feeling in Adam's chest. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at his bowl of cereal, pushing the soggy flakes around with his spoon. Jessica was bustling around the kitchen, pouring coffee and gathering her things for work. But her eyes kept drifting to Adam. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Adam shrugged. "I guess. I can't stop thinking about it." Jessica sat down across from him, her coffee cup cradled in her hands. "I know this is weighing on you," she said gently, "but you've done all you can. You told the judge, and the defense attorney is following up. It's in their hands now." Adam nodded but didn't respond. He appreciated her attempt to comfort him, but it didn't make the knot in his stomach go away. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more he needed to do, more he could do. Jessica's phone buzzed on the counter, and she glanced at the screen. "I have to head out," she said, standing and grabbing her bag. "Stay inside." "Okay. I'll be home by dinner." "Okay," Adam replied absently, watching her leave. The moment the door clicked shut, he sprang into action. He couldn't let it go. Not when he was so close to figuring out the truth. He grabbed his notebook and tablet and started piecing together everything he knew. The argument in the park. The car. Kyle Benson. Rachel Daniels, it all pointed to something bigger than what the trial was addressing. If Rachel had confronted Kyle and disappeared afterward, what did that mean for her safety? And why hadn't anyone looked into it further? Adam decided he needed to go back to the park. He had to retrace his steps, see if there was anything he'd missed. He grabbed his backpack, tucked his notebook and tablet inside, and slipped out the door. The park was only a short bike ride away, but every pedal forward felt heavier as nerves gnawed at him. When he arrived, the park was quiet. A few joggers passed by, and a couple of kids played on the swings. But otherwise, it was the picture of normalcy. Adam walked his bike toward the path near the lake, his eyes scanning the area intently. The scene looked so ordinary now, so peaceful, that it was hard to believe something so sinister had happened here. He reached the spot where he had hidden behind a tree that day and crouched down, running his hands over the ground. At first, there was nothing but dirt and leaves. But then, something caught his eye, a glint of metal buried in the dirt. His heart pounded as he unearthed it, revealing a tarnished charm bracelet. One of the charms was shaped like a sunflower. Adam's breath caught. This had to belong to Rachel or Emma, it was too much of a coincidence. He turned the bracelet over in his hands, his pulse quickening. If this was here, it meant Rachel had been in the park that day. But why was it left behind? Had something happened to her here? He slipped the bracelet into his pocket and stood, his mind racing. He needed to show this to the defense attorney. It was evidence. Proof that the timeline the prosecution was presenting might not be as airtight as they thought. As he turned to leave, a shadow fell over him. Adam froze, his breath hitching. Slowly, he turned his head and saw a man standing a few feet away. He was tall, wearing a black hoodie with the hood pulled low over his face. "You should have stayed out of this," the man said, his voice low and threatening. Adam's heart raced as adrenaline surged through him. He clutched the strap of his backpack tightly, his mind racing for a way to escape. "I don't know what you're talking about," he managed, trying to keep his voice steady. The man took a step closer, and Adam instinctively backed away. "Don't play dumb, kid," the man growled. "Hand over the bracelet." Adam's eyes darted around, searching for help. But the path was empty. His palms were sweaty, and his legs felt like jelly. But he forced himself to think. He had to get out of there. "No," Adam said, his voice trembling but firm. "You're not getting it." The man lunged toward him. But Adam was quicker. He turned and ran, his feet pounding against the dirt path as the man chased after him. The trees blurred around him as he pushed himself to run faster, the weight of his backpack bouncing against his back. His lungs burned, and his heart felt like it would burst. But he didn't dare stop. Up ahead, he saw a group of joggers resting on a bench. "Help," he shouted, waving his arms frantically. "He's chasing me." The joggers turned, their faces alarmed. The man behind Adam skidded to a stop, glancing at the joggers before turning and darting back into the woods. Adam collapsed onto the bench, gasping for air as one of the joggers knelt beside him. "Are you okay?" the jogger asked, her voice filled with concern. Adam nodded weakly, clutching his side. He tried to take this. He pulled the bracelet from his pocket, his hands trembling. The jogger's brow furrowed. "We need to call the police." Adam nodded again, relief and fear mingling in his chest. As one of the joggers dialed 911, Adam stared at the bracelet in his hand. This wasn't just about Nick Harris anymore. It was bigger than that. And now, whoever was behind it knew that Adam wasn't going to stop. The air felt heavier as Adam sat on the park bench, his chest still heaving from the chase. He gripped the sunflower bracelet tightly, the jagged edges pressing into his palm as if to anchor him in reality. Around him, joggers stood in a loose circle, speaking in hushed tones. One of them, a woman in her 30s with sharp, concerned eyes, crouched down beside him. "You're safe now," she said gently. "The police are on their way. Can you tell me what happened?" Adam swallowed hard, his throat dry. "There was a man," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He told me to give him this." He opened his hand to show the bracelet, now tarnished and scuffed, but unmistakably significant. I think it belongs to Rachel Daniels." The woman's expression shifted, her concern deepening. "Rachel Daniels? The one from the news? The case with Emma Davis?" Adam nodded. "She was here that day in the park. I'm sure of it. But I don't think she's safe anymore." Before the woman could respond, the distant wail of sirens broke through the tension, growing louder as they approached. Relief washed over Adam, though it was tinged with a lingering fear. Whoever the man was, he had been close, too close. And Adam knew this was far from over. Minutes later, 2 police cars pulled up, and Officer Sarah Ramirez stepped out of the first one. her no-nonsense demeanor instantly setting the tone. Adam recognized her from the courtroom the day before, and seeing her now felt like a lifeline. She strode toward him, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. "Adam," she said, kneeling in front of him. "Are you okay?" He nodded shakily. "He tried to take the bracelet," he said, holding it out to her. "I think it's Rachel's. She was here that day." Ramirez took the bracelet, her brow furrowing as she examined it. "Where did you find this?" "Near the tree where I hid," Adam explained. "It was buried in the dirt." Ramirez's gaze softened slightly, and she nodded. "Good work, Adam. This could be important." She looked around at the joggers. "Did anyone see the man he's talking about?" One of the joggers stepped forward. "We saw him run off into the woods when Adam called for help," the man said. "He was tall, wearing a black hoodie. That's all I saw." Ramirez's jaw tightened, and she stood. "We'll sweep the area," she said to her partner, who was already radioing for backup. Turning back to Adam, she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing, Adam. But this is getting dangerous. I need you to let us handle it from here." Adam hesitated. The weight of everything, Nick Harris, Rachel Daniels, the man in the hoodie, pressed heavily on his small shoulders. "But what if it's not enough?" he asked quietly, his voice trembling. "What if they get away with it?" Ramirez crouched down again, meeting his eyes. "We're not going to let that happen," she said firmly. "I promise. You've already done more than most people your age ever could. Now it's our turn." Her words offered some comfort, but Adam couldn't shake the unease twisting in his gut. He nodded, though the resolve in his chest remained strong. He wanted to believe her, but there was still so much they didn't know. As the police began their search of the park, Ramirez escorted Adam to her patrol car. Jessica arrived soon after, her face pale and tight with worry. She rushed to Adam, pulling him into a tight hug. "I told you to stay out of this," she said, her voice cracking with fear and relief. "Why can't you just let it go?" Adam looked up at her, his blue eyes steady. "Because it's not over, Mom. They're still out there. And if no one says anything, who will?" Jessica's expression softened, and she cupped his face in her hands. "I just want you to be safe," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're my little boy. I know," Adam whispered. "But I can't just walk away." Ramirez approached them, her expression grim but calm. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "I've arranged for extra patrols near your house. Just in case. Whoever this man is. He clearly doesn't want Adam digging any deeper." Jessica nodded, her grip on Adam tightening. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking. "Please, keep him safe." "We will," Ramirez assured her. She turned to Adam. "I need you to call me if anything happens. No matter how small. Can you promise me that?" Adam nodded, though his mind was already racing with possibilities. He had uncovered something big, and he knew the people behind it wouldn't stop until they silenced him. But as he climbed into the car with his mom, the sunflower bracelet tucked safely in Ramirez's pocket, one thing was clear: Adam wasn't going to back down. The truth was worth the risk. As the courtroom erupted in applause following the guilty verdict, Adam felt a wave of relief wash over him. Justice had been served. Kyle Benson and his accomplices were held accountable, and Rachel Daniels had been found alive, her testimony sealing the case. Though the scars of the ordeal remained, Adam stood proud, knowing his courage had made a difference. Judge Thompson had called him a hero, but Adam didn't feel like one. He had simply done what he thought was right, despite the fear and danger. As he clutched the sunflower bracelet, a symbol of the truth he fought for, he realized how small actions could ripple into something much larger. Life stories like Adam's remind us that bravery knows no age, and even the smallest voice can spark change. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of resilience and hope. Together, let's celebrate the power of the human spirit.